18 centimeters doesn't sound like much. It's roughly the length of a pencil, the width of a paperback book. You wouldn't notice it if your desk shifted by that amount. But 18 centimeters is the difference between a $2 billion artificial island functioning as designed and the ocean slowly reclaiming what was taken from it. And right now, according to satellite-derived elevation data analyzed by independent geospatial researchers, sections of Dubai's most ambitious coastal developments have settled by exactly that amount. Some in under a decade. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't clickbait. Dubai, quite literally, is sinking. And the financial, structural, and human consequences of that reality are unfolding right now, in real time, largely out of public view. To be clear, we're not talking about the entire city disappearing underwater tomorrow. That's not how subsidence works, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling panic. What we are talking about is something more insidious, more quiet. A gradual, measurable, accelerating downward shift in reclaimed land that was never supposed to move this much, this fast. And the developments sitting on top of it, luxury villas, five-star resorts, commercial towers worth billions, are starting to show the strain in ways that are getting harder and harder to hide. So, how did we get here? How did one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history end up on ground that won't stay still? The answer involves sand, speed, and a series of decisions that, in hindsight, look like a $12 billion miscalculation. To understand why parts of Dubai are moving, you need to understand what they're standing on. And the answer, for a shocking number of developments, is essentially a pile of sand dropped into the sea less than 15 years ago. Dubai's reclaimed islands, the Palms, the World Islands, and vast stretches of coastline extending from Jumeirah Beach all the way to Dubai Marina, were built using a process called hydraulic dredging. Enormous ships sucked millions of cubic meters of sand and sediment from the seabed of the Persian Gulf, pumped it through massive pipelines, and deposited it in carefully engineered formations. Rock armoring was installed around the perimeters to prevent erosion. Compaction, the process of forcing the sand to settle under controlled pressure, was performed across the fill areas. On paper, the engineering was sound. On paper. But here's what multiple marine geotechnical engineers have told investigative outlets over the past 3 years, and what internal project documents have reportedly confirmed. The timeline was compressed. Dramatically. Sand that should have been given years, in some cases up to 5 years, to naturally compact under controlled conditions before any structures were placed on top of it, was, in several documented cases, built upon within 12 to 18 months of being dredged. Why? Speed, the pressure to deliver, to sell plots, to attract investors, to maintain Dubai's image as the city of the impossible, reportedly pushed construction schedules past what geological reality could safely accommodate. There were deadlines tied to expo bids, tourism targets, sovereign wealth fund expectations. The sand wasn't ready. They built it anyway. Dr. Khalid Mahmood, a coastal geotechnical engineer who consulted on Gulf land reclamation projects between 2004 and 2012, described the situation in a 2024 interview with a Middle East engineering journal. When you compress the settlement timeline on marine fill, you're not eliminating the settlement, he explained. You're deferring it. The ground will move. The question is when, how much, and what's sitting on top of it when it does. According to Mahmood, proper compaction and preloading for a project of this scale should span 3 to 5 years before any vertical construction begins. In several phases of Dubai's island projects, that window was reportedly cut to under 18 months. Some sections, he suggested, may have seen even less. And now, the deferred settlement is arriving, quietly, relentlessly, centimeter by centimeter. Rami, and that's not his real name, spent 11 years managing luxury waterfront properties on one of Dubai's most photographed coastlines. He oversaw a portfolio of 40-plus villas, each worth between 4 million and 12 million dirham. He left the UAE in late 2024. What he describes doesn't sound like property maintenance. It sounds like triage. In 2019, we started noticing cracks, he told us over a video call from Amman. Not structural, cosmetic at first. Hairline cracks in dome and exterior walls, uneven poolside tiling, doors that wouldn't close properly. Management told us it was thermal expansion. Dubai gets hot, concrete expands and contracts, tiles shift. Totally normal. He paused for a long time. Then the drainage started failing. Not because the pipes were old. They were practically new, but the ground underneath them had shifted enough to change the gradient. Water was pooling in places it had never pooled before. By 2022, we had 3 villas where the ground floor elevation had measurably dropped relative to the access road. You could see it with your eyes. I asked him what the owners were told. Localized settling, expected behavior, within normal parameters. He laughed, not happily. Rami's account aligns with data compiled by independent property inspectors working across Dubai's artificial island developments. According to a 2023 analysis circulated among Gulf-based real estate consultants, a document that was explicitly marked not for public release, over 1,400 residential units on reclaimed land had logged structural or cosmetic complaints, potentially linked to ground settlement in a single 12-month period. That number represented a 340% increase over the same reporting period in 2020. And these aren't budget apartments in a developing suburb. These are properties marketed at 3 million DAO, 7 million DAO, 15 million DAO. Homes sold on the promise of permanence and prestige and generational wealth, now quietly developing the kinds of problems that make structural. Engineers lose sleep, and insurance adjusters reach for their exclusion clauses. What makes this especially difficult to track is the culture of silence surrounding it. Dubai's real estate market depends, perhaps more than any property market on Earth, on perception. Confidence drives investment. Image drives confidence. And any public admission that the ground beneath the Emirates' most iconic developments is unstable would be, to put it diplomatically, economically catastrophic. Multiple property managers and real estate agents who spoke on condition of anonymity described a consistent pattern. Complaints are handled individually and privately. Confidentiality clauses are standard in any settlement agreement, and the word subsidence is virtually never used in any official communication. The preferred language is normal settling within expected parameters. Always expected. Always normal. Always within parameters that nobody can seem to locate. And then there's the World Islands, arguably the most visible symbol of this entire problem. Remember those? The ambitious archipelago of 300 artificial islands shaped like a world map, visible from space, announced with enormous fanfare in 2003. Most of them were never developed, and the ones that remain unbuilt have been quietly eroding and subsiding since construction stalled during the 2008 financial crisis. Satellite imagery analyzed by European Space Agency researchers in 2022 showed measurable shoreline retreat on dozens of islands, with some losing up to 4 meters of beach width in a 5-year period. Sand that was dredged, shaped, and placed at a enormous cost is simply washing back into the Gulf. The ocean is taking back its sand, one tide at a time. A few islands have been developed, the Heart of Europe project being the most notable. But even there, construction timelines have been plagued by delays that sources close to the project attribute, at least in part, to unexpected ground behavior. That phrase again, unexpectedly. As if the ground had somehow betrayed them, rather than doing exactly what physics said it would. Consider James Whitfield, a 52-year-old British investor who purchased an undeveloped World Island plot in 2007 for $7.5 million. He has never been able to build on it. The island has reportedly lost significant elevation and shoreline area. His most recent attempt to sell the plot in 2023 attracted a highest offer of $1.9 million, a 75% loss. "I was sold a dream," he told a London-based property litigation firm. "What I own is a shrinking sandbar." His case, while extreme, reflects a broader pattern of investor losses on the world that multiple legal firms are now quietly assembling into potential class action frameworks. Here's a number that should concern anyone holding real estate on Dubai's artificial coastline. According to engineering assessments compiled by 3 independent marine consultancy firms between 2022 and 2024, an estimated $12 billion in coastal property now sits on land classified as actively settling. That's the technical term. In plain language, it means the ground beneath these structures is still moving downward and has not yet reached a stable equilibrium. It might, eventually, but right now, the settling is ongoing, and in some areas, it's accelerating. $12 billion. That's not a minor accounting footnote. That's not a small cluster of unlucky villas on one bad stretch of sand. That's a systemic issue affecting multiple phases of multiple developments across Dubai's entire reclaimed coastline. The financial ripple effects are already visible, if you know where to look. Resale prices on certain waterfront plots have quietly softened by 15 to 22% since their 2022 peaks, even as Dubai's broader property market has surged on the back of Russian and Indian capital inflows. Insurance premiums for ground floor units on reclaimed land have, according to 2 regional insurance brokers, increased by up to 40% in the past 18 months. And some underwriters are reportedly beginning to exclude subsidence-related damage from standard policies entirely. If you own a villa that's sinking and your insurer won't cover it, well, that's your problem now. For individual investors, the math is devastating. Consider someone like Priya Venkatesh, a composite based on multiple real cases, a 41-year-old tech executive from Bangalore who purchased a $4.2 million villa on a Palm Jumeirah frond in 2021. At purchase, she was assured the development was engineered to the highest international standards. 3 years later, her unit has developed persistent drainage failures, hairline fractures in the foundation slab, and a measurable 6-centimeter differential between the front and rear elevation of her property. Her most recent independent valuation came back at $3.1 million. A $1.1 million loss on paper. And that's before factoring in the $180,000 she spent on remedial waterproofing, structural monitoring equipment, and emergency landscaping repairs over the past 2 years. Her story, or close variations of it, is reportedly playing out across hundreds of similar properties. Hundreds! And it gets worse. Because the subsidence isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening in the Persian Gulf. Even if the engineering had been flawless, and we've thoroughly established it wasn't, Dubai's reclaimed islands would still be fighting an enemy that no amount of money, ambition, or architectural bravado can buy off: the natural environment. The Persian Gulf is one of the most hostile marine environments on Earth for construction materials. Surface water temperatures regularly exceed 35 degrees Celsius in summer months. Salinity levels are among the highest of any major body of water globally. Roughly 40 parts per thousand compared to the global ocean average of 35. And the combination of extreme salt, extreme heat, and relentless humidity creates a corrosion environment that eats through steel reinforcement, degrades concrete bond strength, and accelerates the chemical breakdown of the very materials holding these islands together. According to a 2023 paper published in the journal Coastal Engineering, the rate of chloride-induced corrosion in Gulf coastal structures is approximately 2.5 to 3 times faster than equivalent structures in temperate marine environments. Let that number sit for a moment. Infrastructure designed to last 50 years in the Mediterranean or the North Sea may only achieve 20 to 25 years in the Persian Gulf before requiring major structural intervention. And most of Dubai's artificial islands have been standing for barely 15. Now layer that corrosion problem onto ground that's already sinking. Settlement creates microfractures in concrete foundations and utility conduits. Those fractures allow saltwater intrusion into areas that were supposed to stay dry. Saltwater accelerates rebar corrosion. Corroding rebar expands, physically grows in volume, which creates more fractures, which allows more water, which causes more corrosion. It's a feedback loop. Engineers call it a degradation cascade. And once it starts, it doesn't slow down. It accelerates. Then there's the question hovering over everything: sea level. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's most recent assessment, The Persian Gulf region faces a potential sea level rise of 30 to 60 centimeters by 2100 under moderate emission scenarios. For a city built at sea level, for developments literally manufactured from the sea floor itself, every single centimeter counts. Combine that projected rise with the 10 to 18 centimeters of subsidence already measured on certain developments, and you begin to see a convergence that no marketing campaign can outrun. The sea is rising, the land is falling, and in the narrowing space between them sit billions of dollars worth of buildings and the lives of tens of thousands of families. Dubai's authorities are not oblivious to these challenges. Credit where it's due, the municipality has invested significantly in shoreline reinforcement programs. Rock armoring has been expanded around the most vulnerable island perimeters. Drainage systems have been upgraded across several phases of Palm Jumeirah. These are real measures, real money, real effort. But the gap between what's being done and what's being communicated publicly remains, according to multiple sources, both inside and outside the government, enormous. None of the official communications have used the word subsidence. Not once. None have acknowledged the 340% increase in settlement-related property complaints documented by independent inspectors. And critically, none have addressed the foundational engineering question that everything else depends on. Was the original compaction timeline sufficient? And if not, what is the revised long-term settlement projection for these islands? Where does the sinking stop? Independent engineers are less careful with their language. Dr. Farida Al-Hashemi, a structural risk consultant based in Abu Dhabi, who has assessed Gulf coastal projects for over 2 decades, has publicly stated that several of Dubai's reclaimed land developments are entering a critical monitoring phase, where the difference between managed settlement and structural compromise may narrow significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. In engineering language, that is about as close to ringing a fire alarm as a credentialed professional will go without being compelled by court order. Now, in the interest of fairness, and this matters, some respected experts push back on the most alarming interpretations. Dr. Stephen Garrard, a marine civil engineer who has worked on reclamation projects across Southeast Asia and the Middle East, has argued that settlement in reclaimed land is entirely expected and, in most cases, manageable, with proper monitoring and timely remediation. He contends that Dubai's engineering standards, while compressed in timeline, were not fundamentally inadequate, and that ongoing settlement does not automatically indicate impending structural failure. Settlement and failure are very different things, he said on a construction industry podcast in early 2025. He's right that the data is still developing, but the early data we do have, the 340% complaint increase, the softening property values, the rising insurance exclusions, the measurable elevation changes visible on satellite, doesn't exactly inspire patience. There's another dimension to this story that rarely gets discussed, and it's worth a moment. The people who actually built these islands, the tens of thousands of migrant construction workers, primarily from South Asia, who spent years on dredging ships and compaction rigs in 50-degree heat, they've known about the ground quality longer than anyone. Workers who spoke to labor rights organizations described being pressured to sign off on compaction tests they believed were inadequate, rushing through quality checkpoints to meet deadlines that management described as non-negotiable. One former site supervisor, who worked on a major Palm Jumeirah phase between 2005 and 2008, reportedly told a labor advocacy group in 2023, "We knew the sand wasn't ready. Everyone on site knew. But the schedule didn't allow for what the ground needed." When you are a worker on a visa tied to your employer, you don't argue with the schedule. These are the voices least likely to be heard, in the official narrative, and perhaps the ones who understood the problem earliest. So where does this leave Dubai? And more importantly, where does it leave the hundreds of thousands of people who've staked their savings, their careers, their families' futures on land that may not hold? For investors, the outlook ranges from uncertain to grim. Property values on affected developments may continue their quiet slide as awareness spreads beyond industry insiders and into mainstream media. Insurance will get more expensive and harder to obtain. And the mounting costs of remediation, monitoring, and structural intervention will fall, in most documented cases, not on the developers who compressed the timeline and sold the dream, but on the individual owners left holding both the keys and the bill. For Dubai as a city and as a brand, the challenge cuts deeper than any single construction defect. Because this isn't ultimately a public relations problem that can be solved with a new tourism campaign, or another record-breaking skyscraper, or another celebrity-endorsed property launch. This is a physics problem. Gravity doesn't negotiate. Geology doesn't care about investor confidence. The ocean doesn't respond to press releases. And sand, it turns out, settles on its own schedule, not the one printed in a developer's brochure. The broader lesson extends well beyond the Gulf. From the Netherlands to Singapore, from Jakarta to Miami Beach, from Hong Kong's Airport Island to Lagos's Echo Atlantic, cities around the world are building on reclaimed, low-lying, or geologically uncertain land at unprecedented scale and speed. Dubai is, whether it wants to be or not, the most expensive, most visible, most dramatic test case for whether human engineering can permanently reshape coastlines in a rapidly warming world. It's the experiment the entire planet is watching, or should be watching, and the early results are sobering. This isn't a story with an ending yet. The monitoring data due later this year could change the trajectory, could show stabilization, could trigger a much larger public reckoning. Either way, we'll cover it. Subscribe so you catch that update when it drops. And if you've experienced this yourself, if you live on one of these developments, if you've noticed the cracks, the pooling water, the doors that don't quite close the way they used to, drop a comment below. Your voice matters more than you realize right now. Because the more people who go on record, the harder this becomes for anyone to sweep under a very expensive, very slowly sinking rug. This story isn't over, not by a long way.